Well, all right. Welcome, everybody. Another episode of Legends, Sports, and Amplify, where we're always here at least once or twice a week talking baseball history and Negro League baseball history, all those passions and pursuits that go along with it. And I'm really, really happy to have on today, again, for the second time. You were one of my first guests last year. Author, historian, real life contemporary barnstormer Phil S. Dixon. How are you, sir?
I am doing very well this morning.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for doing this again. I mentioned to you before we got on here, I appreciate you taking the time to do this again. I wanted to hold off. You came out with your new book on Buck. I know you probably were a little bit busy and wanted to reach out and see if I can get you on here to talk about it. And here we are. So, yeah, lots to talk about. You are usually always a busy man, giving your talks, doing your little barnstorming. I know you mentioned you hadn't been able to do it as much as you used to before the pandemic, but what have you been up to lately on that front?
Well, just returned from Downs, Kansas, and the Kansas Storytelling Festival, and that was exciting. Was down there for 2 days and with a lot of national speakers, and I heard some pretty good speakers telling some great stories, and mine were baseball stories, but there's were stories that were covered a multitude of subjects. So it was a great time, and that was my second time going down to the storytelling festival. So I always enjoyed it.
And what are they? What other? I mean, so these are people from all over the country, all over. They come and they talk about all kinds of subjects. I mean, what is the Kansas Storytelling Festival?
Yeah, usually they bring in about four or five featured speakers. I know we stayed at a kind of resort kind of place, and one of the guys was from Boston. Another guy was from Covington, Kentucky,
Cool.
and of course I was from Kansas City, and there were several other people. But they bring in speakers, national speakers, some really outstanding
That a
speakers.
yearly that a yearly thing that they do?
Huh?
That's a yearly event that they do, or
Yes, a year. That this
cool.
was the 28th annual.
Oh, wow, that is awesome. That is awesome. So you also mentioned that you're heading over to the Jerry Malloy in June in Birmingham.
Yes, I'm going to go down there and talk to some of the guys who really enjoy doing this Negro League history, and going to fellowship with those guys for a while.
Absolutely. I've had several of them on. They're great conversations, and you know why? I've been doing these. I mentioned to you this is episode I think 133. A lot of it's my own rambling, but I've done close to 80 of these interviews with authors, researchers, historians, whoever I could that to get these stories out there because the more people who hear about them, and a lot of it, like a lot of your work, has been around for a while, and getting people to revisit some of those is important as well because some of you guys have been at this a long, long time, and without the efforts you guys were making, who knows in the last year. I mean, I started doing these because of the Major League Baseball announcements. That was the biggest reason. So, to give some context to all this, because you're getting all these questions asked. And you got to have the stories because there's not all the statistics there. That's more of it's being uncovered, but the stories are important, and you have a lot of them. That's for darn sure. So,
Yes.
um,
And I do try to tell people that statistics don't really tell the story. It tells a story,
piece of it, yeah.
but unless you put the statistics in some kind of context where
Hmm.
people can understand it and know it's missing, there's things that's missing out of statistics. And the stories, and probably the thing I speak on the least is statistics because
Hmm.
generally when I'm talking to people, they're more in concern with history and knowledge, and not numbers. So if it's a pure baseball group, maybe you can get away using a few more numbers. But the general audiences I talk to, some of them aren't even baseball fans,
Hmm.
and everybody loves a good story, and
Right.
especially if it's like if I'm barnstorming, I'm going to tell you some things that happen right there in your town.
Hmm.
So people really like that. But yeah, it's interesting, and I will mention too my new book on Buck O'Neill. comes 30 years after my first book was released, and it was called the Kansas City Baseball Trivia Quiz Book. And that same year, I released the Negro Baseball Leagues of Photographic History. We had two books that year. That
Hmm.
was 30 years ago.
No kidding. Wow. Yeah, you've been at this. You've been at this a long time. And what always blows me away is 30 years ago when you were doing these, we were at that same event in Northeast PA, and you remembered it like it happened yesterday. And I may have met you way back in 1993. When you were probably right in the doing your tours to get your books out there, and you were at that event in Scranton at
Ooh,
Lackawanna County Stadium. That's just, I mean, it's very, very cool. Small world, let me tell you. Um, so the statistics part to me is always interesting because I'm always digging every single day. I mean, I have a lot of, and they're important. Don't get me wrong. Statistics are important. Baseball, they tell a story with those numbers. But like you pointed out, they're not all of it. And if they're incomplete or you don't have the context behind them, it could put a different slant one way or the other on what you're saying. I put out something the other day. If you dig down, some of these guys, um, Clarence Moore, Cool Breeze. Have you heard about Cool Breeze more? He was a player. He shows us having two at bats for the Bacharachs back in like 1928. But when you dig into his story, he had a whole impact on his community and is in the Sports Hall of Fame in North Carolina. Has a very cool nickname, Cool Breeze Moore, just like Cool Papa Bell. But if you looked at those two at bats, you'd go, yeah, it must not have been all that good. You can look at it and point it where you want to go with numbers, and there's more to those stories. There really are, and you tell a lot of great stories. Are you?
well, you mentioned something that, well, I probably need to elaborate on that a little bit because the economics of the Negro Leagues wasn't always the greatest.
Hmm.
So you would have guys that would be maybe working for, factory or something like that, and they might come out and play a couple of games,
Yeah.
get in a league game or two. But the economics being as they were, it wouldn't make sense for them to leave their job and
Hmm.
then go with the baseball team, and then 5 months later you don't have a job because it's winter time,
Hmm.
and if you don't go to Puerto Rico or Cuba, depending on Mexico, depending on what era you're in, you're out of a job. So
Right.
some guys aren't willing to take that chance. And there are a lot of good baseball players that just never left home.
That is exactly the kind of context that I'm trying to get people, get it in front of them because this, you got to go back 100 years and put yourself in that time period. This was not like today with long-term contracts and guaranteed money and all sorts of signing bonuses and all that kind of stuff. No, this was a different world where they had to play to eat, right? I mean, this was not. Yeah. So,
Sometimes owners would guarantee your money, and you still wouldn't get it.
right? Exactly. So,
So,
it really, it all comes down to is about money. Bob Kendrick, you guys have all pointed this out. These guys could have played any sport. They were great athletes. They could have played any number, but there was only really one way to make money back in the early 1900s for a long time, and that was baseball. You could make money either doing it professionally, semi-pro, playing barnstorming games, pickup games, industrial league, whatever it was you were playing. So you got to kind of
also,
follow the money.
don't forget boxing. Don't forget
Oh,
boxing.
boxing, right? Yeah, you're a boxing fan. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
A
That's
lot of
right.
great black boxers during those periods as well.
That's right. I'm surprised how many times I go digging on players and find out they did a little bit of boxing in their career early on. There's a number of them that have done that. Yeah. And the story about Cool Breeze was he. So he goes on. Are you familiar? The Asheville Blues. Have you heard of that baseball team?
Mhm.
So Asheville. He was the owner and player manager for the Asheville Blues for many years in the 1940s. and then went on to coach high school baseball and become athletic director for a school that won multiple championships, a segregated high school in Asheville, North Carolina. Great story about this guy. But in 1928, when he gets those two at bats for the Bacharachs, he was in the middle of graduating from college, going to I think it was Carolina A&T, where he was trying to get his degree. So who knows? He was probably playing for some college money, right? At the time, who knows how he wound up? I'd love to know the story how he wound up in Atlantic City, but anyway. So Buck O'Neil finally gets into the Hall of Fame. That's something that was long overdue. What was your thoughts on all that on that whole process?
Well, being one of the people who were selected to put the ballot together,
Hmm.
um, I knew Buck was going to be on the ballot, and I kind of knew Buck was going to get in. I could kind of sense that he got so close the last time. I was more worried about the other Negro Leaguers not getting in, and we did get Bud Fowler in, but when it came to time to vote, I wasn't on the voting group, but I was on the group that put the ballot together. So uh, I was glad to see Buck get in.
Hmm.
Interesting thing about Buck, he died in 2006. There's been nothing new added to his legacy between 2006 and 2021, but he got in 2021, didn't get in 2006. That's
Yeah,
very interesting
go
tale in
figure, right?
itself.
Absolutely. You know how many people I've talked to in the last year or more with the Negro League? We're talking about statistics earlier. That then when Buck does get in, have said to me, "Wow, was he really that good a player? Was he? You look at if you look at strictly at statistics, you go, okay, maybe, but." It's more to it than that. I mean, the Baseball Hall of Fame is not the Hall of Stats. There's more to it than just statistics, and his legacy and what he created, and the fact that he was not just a player, he was a manager and a scout and a coach and a barrier breaker and all sorts of other things. Um, he's well deserving to have gotten
Mhm.
into the Hall of Fame for sure. And you mentioned you're not quite sure if you're going to be able to get up there in for the induction.
I'm still trying to plan out my summer. I've got all kind of activities going, and now people are trying to get me to go different places. So it's just a matter if I can schedule it. Buck O'Neil is important to me because
Hmm.
I knew Buck O'Neil, probably knew Buck O'Neil longer than any of the people who are talking about him now. But yeah, our interaction goes back to 1981, and prior to that, he was good friends with my relatives, and even stayed with my cousin when he would go into Detroit. So there's a family connection, and so I'm going to try my best to make it so I can hear the speeches. And actually, I've never been to Cooperstown before. I've been, I one time I was speaking in Delhi, New York. That was probably 50 miles away, and my schedule just didn't permit me to get into Cooperstown. But I've been close, but I've never been there, and so this might be my chance. And in one way, because of some of the things that are happening now, the Hall of Fame did just make some new rules last week where they're going to vote every 3 years. But I still think we're getting to the end of the line, and I hate to say this, where we're not going to be able to get many Negro leaguers in. But there are a lot of people deserving. There are people who did what Buck O'Neil did and more,
Hmm.
who were great players, managers, scouts. I think of Chet Brewer for one.
Hmm.
I think of Vic Harris for one. I think of George Scales had a very similar profile to Buck O'Neil, and we couldn't even get Chet Brewer on the ballot the last time. So there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the number of players in the Hall of Fame, and if you're just looking at it sort of strictly from a historical or demographic perspective, absolutely the Negro League players are underrepresented for sure uh, in the Hall of Fame. They made some changes recently to that. I mean, many of them weren't going to get back on the ballot for 10 more years. So,
I
so they made some changes to that. Have you been able to? I'm still trying to wrap my head around some of that. Been able to digest some of those changes at all? What they're going to do?
I haven't had a chance to talk to many of the people that were involved, and these are people who were ready to push to get them to go less than 10 years. But it just so happened they made that announcement when I'm at the storytelling festival, and my mind is wrapped in the storytelling festival because I'm doing all these programs by memory, and so I usually I practice every night on speeches and poetry and all this kind of stuff that I use in my presentation. So, and then when I got back, I was so exhausted from having to practice every night for the past month that, and then the Buck O'Neill book came out. So it's been
Hmm.
just a tough week, but I'm going to get with them and
Good.
people like Ted Noor. I'll talk to Ted Noor and that's
Ted's great. Yeah. Yeah, Ted with the rap Dixon. They're working on a documentary about rap that's supposed to be in the works. So yeah, hopefully that gives a little more exposure. So he's a guy. You mentioned Tubby Scales. Who else you think who would be your top five that really should be in there right now?
man. Well, the guy I pushed for real hard, and they just poo-pooed on him, was John Donaldson.
John Donaldson. Yeah.
John Donaldson for 30 years,
Hmm.
30 years, and I know a lot of people think about Pete Gordon, but I was on the John Donaldson bandwagon and actually presented the papers to the records to John Donaldson for 4,000 strikeouts in 2006, and he still
Hmm.
didn't get in. And then Pete goes on, and I think he's up to 5,000 strikeouts. He doesn't get in. But part of the reason why John Donaldson doesn't get in is because people who are voting don't understand the story
Hmm.
of the Negro Leagues. John Donaldson played outside of the league because he could make a living better than he could make inside the league.
Hmm.
So people were willing to pay him for his services. And so they used that against John Donaldson. They say he wasn't in the league and that kind of thing. But John Donaldson was just a fantastic player.
Hmm.
So,
No,
got phone background. Just ignore that. We'll
I,
talk in a minute.
I am with you on the John Donaldson. I'm on the John Donaldson bandwagon for sure. You know, and then when he does get to the Negro National League in 1920, he's already 30-ish years old, with probably about 3,000 innings or more under his belt by that time. Who knows how many innings?
Mhm.
So he doesn't have the statistical impact that you could have had he. And that's probably true of a lot of these guys. I mean, um, what if? I mean, yeah, you just look at Jackie Robinson, right? So he's 27 when he gets in there, right? What if he was a normal college progression coming out of UCLA, decides to play baseball when he's 20, 21 years old, gets into the pipeline and he's playing? Imagine the careers that some of these guys could have had. Boy, oh boy. I mean, every time I think about the whole color barrier and the Jim Crow and everything else, it just makes me go, how could this have happened? It really, it really amazes me.
I think about Bob Thurman, who joined the Reds in the
Hmm.
1950s. He was 38 years old.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or the
And
guys like
so,
Ray Dandridge, who
yeah,
never got the opportunity, playing at 30, 38 years old or whatever for Minneapolis.
yeah,
Should have had
Satchel
Satchel
Paige, a
Paige. I mean,
42-year-old rookie. How about that one?
you could go on and on with these, right? I mean, it really, it just makes you go, come on. What was lost to baseball history and American history? I guess we wouldn't be having these conversations today if it didn't happen. However,
And see, one of the reasons I specialize so much in barnstorming because when you say what was lost to baseball history, it was only lost to the minor leagues and the American and National League. The rest of America enjoyed it.
hmm, they sure did, and they did not. I don't think they get enough credit for spreading the brand of baseball all over the continent, all over the world. Even we take think of
That's
some of the Japanese tours and everything else, but these guys that they go down and they play. I talked to Wayne Moody the other day, whose grandfather was down playing in Venezuela. They
right.
were everywhere. They were all over the place playing. In Latin America and Canada and all over the continent. And that's why there's so many stories that could be told because they literally were countless, countless places. So
Yeah,
you've written.
and well, I was going to say I might mention too because I interviewed a number of players, but I remember talking to Chet Brewer, and Chet Brewer was born in Leavenworth, Kansas, grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, but played in Mexico and played different places in Puerto Rico and Venezuela. Anyway, he could speak fluent Spanish, and there were several guys that could speak fluent Spanish who were from the Negro Leagues, but they played
Mhm.
enough in the Caribbean that they learned the language.
hmm You know, no, there's no wonder why a lot of them went down there, and many didn't bother to come on back. I mean, I'm going to go down. I mentioned this to you before. My wife is from Guadalajara originally, Mexico, and so this summer I'm going to go on an odyssey down to Aguas Calientes, trying to find out more about what Wild Bill Wright and Wild Bill Wright's dugout down there, what he was doing in the 50s and 60s. I think that bar and restaurant that Bill Wright had was all the way until the 80s even. So I want to find out what happened to it. They've got a great baseball history down there in Aguas Calientes, Mexico. So I'm going to find out more. They have their own baseball team there, and several players have come out of there and played in the Mexican leagues and in minor league baseball. So I'm on that Grail quest to try to find out more about Wild Bill Wright.
Well, there was a number of players I know that were down in Mexico for quite a while. Earl Tabron was down there,
hmm
stayed down there. Bertram Hunter played for the Crawfords and played for the Monarchs in 1932 was down there. Shackle Ford, he was another.
Yeah.
He was down there. Uh, I'm trying to think. Barney Surreal was down there for a long time, and of course, Wright. Was, and I had a chance to interview him. So
You
I interviewed
did.
a lot. Yeah, yeah.
I imagine. How'd you get when did you get to interview him?
I interviewed him probably in the '90s. Uh,
Yeah.
he came. I interviewed him in Baltimore. I think it
No
was
kidding.
Baltimore. Yeah.
Boy, did he come back here to live? I know he married a woman from Mexico, right? Stayed down there and had Wild Bill Wright's dugout, and I'm sure there's all kinds of other stories. But do you know much of what had happened to it?
That I don't know, but he came back for like maybe some Negro League event.
Ah,
I've been to so many of them over the years. I couldn't. I'm trying to think. I'm almost sure it was Baltimore.
okay, cool, cool.
Sure it was Baltimore.
So you have written, so many great books that are just go-tos when it comes to the Negro Leagues. Your American Baseball Chronicles that you've written, the Kansas City Baseball book, the Rube Foster, so many others. Now you wrote the Dizzy Daffy Barnstorming Tour. I highly recommend everybody check out. But you wrote a book, and I'm thinking this is the tie here. But you wrote a book on Buck. Um, Called The Rookie, The Man, The Legacy. And now you've got this one, which is The Rookie, His Words, His Voice. What made you write a second book about Buck, and is there a tie there?
Yeah, yeah. The interesting thing is, I wrote the book on Buck, and I was out on tour doing barnstorming tours, and I'm in some little town. I forget what it was. And the guy had read my book before I got there. He said, "Your presentation is so much different than your book." And he just had read the one book on Buck O'Neill, and he began to talk and say some things. And you listen to people when they talk, right?
hmm
And so at that, listen after listening to him, I said, you know what? I need to address this book again. And so that was 2017. And
hmm
so I took the original manuscript, and then the other thing was I talk about the Monarchs game by game, so you can follow them. But I had found at least 30 more games. So I wanted
Wow.
to talk about those games as well. And then my wife and I were at a book festival, and we ran into a young lady who had a genealogy book, and she had QR codes in there, and you scan the QR code, and you could hear her grandfather talking, right?
Oh, wow.
So when I saw that, some things went off in my mind and my wife's mind as well. So if you pick up the Buck O'Neill book, not only is it large, it's a coffee table book, right?
Hmm.
But it has 11 QR codes in it, and it's loaded with more games that I found, and I'm telling more stories. But I looked for all the articles I could find on Buck. I mean, I went back to the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and I tried to find the 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 wisest things that Buck O'Neill ever said. And we, believe it or not,
Sure is a lot.
what was said in the 90s wasn't always the wisest thing he had said. So you had to dig, and man,
That's
I did.
awesome.
And then the other thing, I had this interview, these QR codes that I have where you hear Bucks talking, and we're talking about specific things, that kind of thing. But it was interviews done in 1985 when Buck was 74 years old, and most of the people who and most of the things online, even this was 9 years before Ken Burns ever released
Hmm.
baseball, and his mind was sharp. It was sharper than it was in the end. But people think they were listening to a great Buck in the end. Wait till you hear Buck at 74.
I bet. I bet. Holy cow. So within the book itself, you can scan these QR codes where? Where do you do?
Yeah, there's 11 of them. They're in different chapters, and technology has changed. So all you have a a smartphone where you just scan right over the QR code. People use them in restaurants and everything. So it's gotten easier since 2017. You used to have to download an app,
Right?
but now it's gotten easier, and
Yeah.
that's one of the great things about the book. I was on a interview on
Wow.
MP the other day, and they had scanned about three of the codes, and so you could hear Buck O'Neill talking
Oh, it's
right
beautiful.
in our interview as we were having the interview. So it's a great revelation, and I think that I'm certainly the first person in the Negro League genre
It,
to do. I could be the first person in the sports book genre to have done QR codes as well, and I have many more interviews, so you haven't seen.
oh my. No, I tell you what, I have never heard of that before. To be able to have that interaction between having the book and then being able to actually hear those types of things. And you've got not just interviews with Buck. I mean, my goodness gracious, you've got hundreds and hundreds of interviews with all sorts of players that would be so much fun to do that with. Wow, that's like a national treasure. That stuff, it really is. I mean, that stuff, yeah, that's a piece of history that I'm glad you got them, and I'm glad you're sharing them. That is very very cool. Um, so going back to the first book, that tie, the rookie.
Mhm.
What tell us about what that piece of the title of each book means.
Yeah, well, I kept the rookie part
Hmm.
because when Buck O'Neill came to the Monarchs, it was like his rookie season. Even though he had played part of the year with Memphis in '37, and so it originally started uh, back in '84. Me and Buck O'Neill had a conversation. So I said, Buck, I have all these real specific questions I want to ask you, but they're not general. I want to ask you about certain players each year and
Hmm.
what happened each year. So we got together and we started on 1938, the first year he came to Kansas City. It took us 4 hours. We were so exhausted after that that we never did 39, 40, 40. But I had this 1938 collection of great information. I mean, and so that's where I ended up using that tape to tell the story. And then it allowed me to tell a unique story about what was going on in the Negro American League in 1938 through the eyes of Buck O'Neill and the Kansas City Monarchs, the
Awesome.
travels, the exhibition games. And if you read this book, not one thing that you'll be able to tell, and this might help you with the statistics because I have a way in this book to let you know where which games have statistics and which box scores have which games have no box scores can be found. But I came up with a code. I'm always trying to do something unique.
Hmm.
So read this book, then you can go back to the statistics. And the other thing is the
Oh my God.
statistics that they represent for Buck doesn't include all the games I found.
Wow. So you've got another little treasure chest of things that, yeah, yeah, very, very cool. The statistics thing, just going back to that again for a second. That's the thing about the Negro Leagues that I think people have the hardest time about because they to differentiate between what was a league game, what was a barnstorming game, what were barnstorming games against higher level competition, which ones weren't. Sometimes league teams barnstormed against each other. I mean, there's so many combinations,
Mhm.
and trying to sift through all that, that has got to be a difficult thing. And unfortunately, a lot of it may never be found at this point. I mean, just over time, as you know how it is, things just erode.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I push telling the whole story. So the
Hmm.
statistics that they're putting out now, they're just taking games that were played against other black teams in
Hmm.
the league. So all the exhibition games basically are in the trash can.
Hmm.
And so what is an exhibition game? And to be honest with you, there were teams like in 1938, the Sheboygan Chairs and the Madison Blues. Uh, these teams were beating Negro League teams. And so this is a pretty good semi-professional baseball out
Hmm.
there. But people won't know that if you only tell a piece of the story. So one of the reasons why I've always talked about the barnstorming games and the league games because that's the whole story. I don't I don't want to be the sound of one hand clapping and saying that. And I want to tell the whole story with both hands, and that's the way I approached it. And to be honest with you, years ago, uh, myself and John Holloway, we used to have some spirited conversations about how to cover Negro League statistics. And my thing was always to tell the whole story and then let people sort it out for themselves.
Hmm. No, I agree, and there's so much more to those because sometimes they were playing these exhibition games, if you want to call them, but there was a purpose to some of those. I mean, it was a way for them sometimes to evaluate talent. A lot of times they played these games and they found somebody that they took along with them, right, to the to the next town, or became a future player for them. It was kind of, in a way, their like a de facto kind of minor league or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it was more to just the fact that they were playing for, the gate. Yeah, everybody's trying to make a little money, but there was a purpose to a lot of these games. And yeah, you got to wrap your head around so much with the Negro Leagues, and it's you and other authors and researchers telling these stories and giving that perspective that I hope people start to realize, yeah, you know what? There's a lot of very, very cool history here that
Yeah,
they
and
need to learn about.
it might have occurred in your town and you don't know it.
Hmm.
One thing I was just thinking as you were talking, like the Belleville Stags, Belleville, Illinois, just outside of St. Louis, just on the other side of East St. Louis there. The Belleville Stags had a great team sponsored by the Stag Brewery, and they would draw actually, I'll just put it this way. The Monarchs quit going to St. Louis proper, the St. Louis Stars folded. And so
Hmm.
the Monarchs quit going to St. Louis in 1931. They didn't go back and play another game in St. Louis until 1938. So they went around St. Louis. So they go to like East St. Louis at that time, big industry town, had a great baseball team, East St. Louis Blue Jays. And then, but Belleville had the Stags Brewery. And after Prohibition, they put their money into this Stags beer, and they had a baseball team. And this team really drew, and sometimes the crowd. I mean, they drew so well that people could come from St. Louis to see that game instead of the Monarchs going into St. Louis. And think of all the black population of St. Louis, and the Monarchs bypassed it to go to Belleville, Illinois. That's a
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Yeah, I mean, as you know, I've been digging around here, and you already know this, but another thing too, there were league games that these teams would often play, not even in a home park that was either team's
so true.
stadium. It would be almost like a barnstorming event, but it was considered a league game. But sometimes it wasn't. I mean, trying to wrap your head around all that, man, I'll tell you what. And that's like you said. That's why these stories are an important piece of all this. Before we got started, you told a couple interesting ones that highlight how it's all around you. How you were at giving your talk, and people found out that Bullet Rogan's wife was from their hometown, and
Yeah, well, the reason they found it out is because I told them.
exactly.
they they don't know. They don't know. And see, but I when I'm speaking on baseball, when I study baseball, I'm always interested where people came
Hmm.
from. And so I knew his wife was from Parker City, Kansas. I'm in Downs, Kansas, and you got to have coming from where I live and going to Downs, you got to go through Parker City. And so I'm right there in the town that Catherine was born. Now she moved when the family later on moved to a farm in Hugo, Colorado. And one time I was going to Colorado Springs to speak. I got on the wrong road, and before I knew it, I was in Hugo, Colorado. I said, "Hey, this is where Catherine grew up." But every place I go, I have little bits of knowledge like that from really traveling all over the country and usually by car. And I've been doing it for 40 years. And so I have lots of those stories. So it's just amazing where people come from.
Oh boy, you just step on all kinds of things. I can't believe I was digging around the other day about something about the Bacharachs, the Atlantic City team, and came across this newspaper clipping from 1928 that showed that they did this tour of Northeast Pennsylvania, where I grew up. So I piqued my interest, right? I had to check it out, and it's mentioning little towns. It mentioned Scranton, it mentioned Wilkes-Barre, but it mentioned Nanticoke and several others little towns up in Northeast PA where people, if you're not from there, nobody ever heard of these towns. But
Hold
here
on just a
were
second. Hold
Negro
on
League
just a
teams
second. I got to
playing.
get some. Hold on just a second.
All right.
I was cooking a boiled egg and I had an explosion in the kitchen. I
Oh
said, "Oh,
no.
the water went out." Okay, so I said, "What was that?" And then I thought about it. So, wait a minute, that's that boiled egg I was
Oh
cooking.
no.
But go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that
That's okay.
interruption. It's rare. Okay.
That's okay. But no, it just blew me away that Nanticoke, Pennsylvania, no one's even heard of Nanticoke. People in Scranton, when I talked to them, I still have many, many friends there. It's where I grew up. They had no idea there was a Negro League baseball team that played that was in Scranton. I mean, this history is so incredible, and it goes so deep, and it goes back so far that if more people knew about it, they probably would be doing a little bit more investigating, and it would be more of an interest. But they don't know about it, and that's why all these stories that you're telling and spreading it around again.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's why I love calling it barnstorming when you go on your little tours, because that's pretty close to what you're doing when you're going out there into the world and telling these stories. You're doing some modern day barnstorming for sure,
Yeah. Well, a couple in 2013 to 2019, I went to over 200 cities,
and put a
and
lot of miles on. I remember you telling me those stories.
I drove the entire distance. And the interesting thing was, I probably went to 250 cities. But if I went to like, say, I might gone to Omaha, every year, but I only counted it once. It's one city. So I went to a lot of cities, and so I got to know people in these cities. And before I went to places, I would always do lots of studying on that city. So I would go, like for instance, I could every city where there was a lynching in the state of Missouri, I've been except one. I know which one that is, but all the rest of them I've been there. And so when I got there, I knew the history of that town, and I knew. And in some places, I would drive, like for instance, there's a place called Pierce City, Missouri, and I've gone down there in the area to speak, but I passed through Pierce City, and every time I go through Pierce City, it's almost like I remember that there was a lynching there, and uh, and so it's kind of like every time I hear that name, my mind just thinks about the history of that particular town. And I've never spoken there, but I spoke. I've actually presented in many towns where there was a lynching. Was able to talk about that inside of my baseball speech, and people just amazed because they never heard that history either.
Unbelievable. One of the things I wanted to ask you for sure is the cover art on your latest book about Buck. You put out something several months back, and you said, "What do you think?" And the first thing I saw were the replications of the famous Buck O'Neill pictures that were in those three shots on the cover. Who's the little boy who did them?
Actually, it's my great nephew.
Really cool.
Yeah, and because no book ever had any black kids on the cover,
Wow.
that concerned me, and so I wanted to um, uh, put a black kid on the cover, and Buck O'Neill was all about the youth, so I needed to have that as well.
And replicating those poses was a thing of was just a great touch, a thing of beauty, man. I'll tell you. And that I'm sure that was intentional, right?
Yeah, and trying to do that with a 3-year-old is
I'm sure. Yeah,
but
the
we had
one
great
the one with the
photography.
glove up. I mean, they're iconic pictures themselves of Buck. And then yeah, 3 years old. 3 years
Three,
old.
three
Wow.
years old, and I guarantee you, he loves baseball so much that he's going to play the game. I guarantee you.
Good.
And
I mean, he's got a heck of a lineage that you could teach them a lot about the game. I think it's important for kids to know the history of the game. It's not all about the bat flipping and the whatever's going on out there now. There's more to the game, and all of these people that we're talking about in both the Negro Leagues, Black baseball, the major leagues, they all were kind of building blocks to where we are today. The game changes all the time, but you can't forget where it came from and all the stories about the past either, because they're important. They really really are. So what are you working on? You take a little break for a while, or what are you going to be working on next?
no breaks. 30 years ago, I had two books come out in the same year. So I'm going to try to see if I can do three this year. 30 years later, put three out.
Three.
Yeah, so the Buck O'Neill book is hitting the market, and I think people will really enjoy that book.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a lot of information in there, not only a lot of good baseball, but a lot of great social history. So when you read the book, you can read the book and learn about Joe Louis and Max Schnelling and Henry Armstrong, Haile Selassie, and Adolf Hitler, Harry S. Truman. It's all in there, and it's woven into a baseball story. So Buck O'Neill enjoyed big bands, and music was one of the things he enjoyed. So Cap Calloway's in there, Count
Cool.
Basie's in there, Stephen Fetch's in there,
Step and fetch it.
Satchel Paige is in there, Erskine Hawkins. Let's see, who else is in there? Glenn Miller's in there.
You're a
Uh,
music. You're a music man. You're a
well,
music. You're a music lover. Yeah.
I definitely am. Matter of fact, if you see there, I don't know if you see a wall of LPs over there,
Mm-hmm.
but I definitely enjoy music. And believe it or not, when I met Buck, this was, I want to say it was 1989. No, it was 1980. And I used to do a big band radio show. So when I meet Buck and he starts talking about big bands, he was amazed. How do you know all these people? And it's because I had studied that because I enjoyed that. And of course, being a musician, we played a
Hmm.
lot of those songs through high school and that kind of thing. So me and Buck connected, and of course, I was a traveling musician, and I had played in many of the cities that he had appeared as a baseball player. So we had that in common, as well as he knew my family. So we connected on a in pretty good level. And but I wanted to tell Buck's story in the way that I knew Buck, and then also I knew his wife very well, Aura O'Neill, and people don't talk about her as much.
Hmm.
So, but she was real supportive of my work, and many times I would call Buck might be gone, and she would answer the phone, and we just talked. So she had great stories. They were married over 50 years, and he met her after a baseball game in Memphis.
Very
So,
cool. I still makes me laugh, chuckle about it, thinking about you got your start in your collecting, that connection to music, baseball cards, and everything else way back when because of the Beatles. I just thought that was Beatles cards started the whole ball rolling. I mean, I think it's awesome. You just never know, right? What's going to spark the interest, and that's why I think these stories are so important. You don't know what you're talking. You probably see it all the time when you go to these places and give your talks. Some people respond to things visually, sometimes when they hear them, sometimes when they experience them, but you never know what piece that there is going to just spark that interest and make them go, yeah, yeah, I can do a little bit more digging on this, and it gets a ball rolling, and I just think it's a good thing. Plus, it's just a good
yeah,
way to grow as a
yeah, and I'm
person.
always trying to get young fans interested in baseball as well.
Yep.
So you'll see me usually recognizing the youngest person in my to attend my programs. I always encourage people to bring your children out because when you got baseball fans that are 50 plus and that's the only people coming to hear you, it doesn't make it's kind of like a church with all old people. There's not much of a future if you don't have some young kids in there. So we
That.
want baseball to, and especially baseball history, to be alive and well. And we need to expose
Yep.
young people to it in very creative ways. And so I've tried to do that my whole
Yeah, I applaud that, but I understand what you're saying because that's another reason I've tried to have these and have on the newer authors and younger people as well, researchers, people who are just getting into it, because there's got to be the next generation of this. There are so many more stories to tell. I mean, countless. They're like stars in the sky. You can't even imagine. Every one of these guys have a story. There's a reason behind what they did, um, but you need more people. You need help, right? You need, it can't just be you and a handful of others doing it. You need some other people to pick up the, and find some of these out there as well.
yeah,
Um, I know they're planning. I just thought about this. Are they planning a trip up from Kansas City from that area to go to Buck? I'm sure they are, right? To go to the Hall of Fame.
I have not heard, but I know if they haven't, they should.
Yeah.
They should because Buck has a lot of friends. Kansas City was Buck's town, right? This is where he was, and
Hmm.
so this is where he died, and
I've got
and
my, I've got
home,
my. This is
right?
my Negro Leagues, my Negro Leagues T-shirt. It's got Buck O'Neill 22 on the back. You can't see that, but yeah.
But even the night that Buck was selected in the Hall of Fame, the Negro Leagues Museum had something, and I gave a event over at a restaurant, right? And a lot of Buck's friends and people came over there. It was hard for me to get publicity for my event because everybody was focused on the museum. But I tried to tell them, I said, there should be parties all over town
Hmm.
because Buck O'Neill touched so many people. It shouldn't be two, and you should spread some of this love around because there were a lot of people who love Buck, right? And so, but it was hard to get publicity for my, but I didn't hear about any other events. Should have been more. Should have been
Should
more.
have been more. I
Yeah.
haven't I haven't been up to the Hall of Fame I mean, being up and growing up in Northeast PA, I went, I think, on a Boy Scout trip when I was about 11 or 12 years old. The only time I've ever been there was only a few hours away. But if you get to go, you will love it. I mean, it's just a, I don't know, there's certain places you walk into. Of course, I get that way. I'm a sentimental guy. I walk into, a college football stadium. I went to Penn State and haven't been to a game in many years. But when I walk in there, I get goosebumps. There's just certain places that give you that vibe if you're really, really into it. And the Baseball Hall of Fame is like that, for sure, because there's just so much history walking around up there and all around you. So yeah, if you get to go, that would be awesome. And like I said, I think they got to be
You, you,
planning something. They got to be planning something to head up there.
that's a good suggestion. The charter a bus and take it up there. Another thing you just made me think about the Hall of Fame. In 1938, Grover Cleveland Alexander was elected to the Hall of Fame, and they asked him in 1938 what he thought about it. It's in the book, and he said, "Well, he said it doesn't put any food on my table. It's just your picture on a wall." So
Right?
he didn't think much of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
it's another way to preserve the history of the game, and until the 70s, a big piece of that history was missing. So
yes,
they still have, as we've talked about earlier, I think a little bit more work to do when it comes to getting some other players from Black baseball history in the Negro Leagues into the Baseball Hall of Fame. I think they will. I mean, it's just going to take. Got to keep at it, right? Got to keep poking the
yeah.
bear.
And you kind of keep developing the story.
Hmm.
And once again, I think the story has to be a complete story. You've got to tell the story, and then like in the case of John Donaldson, you have to have someone who can articulate the story outside of how many strikeouts and John Donaldson had, I mean, a ton of strikeouts,
Hmm.
but there's more to his story, and you have to be able to articulate that so that people understand why he is on a par with all these other people. And then also the other things, baseball players, man, me being a stats guy, with the stats being there, you can always compare things. But you take John Donaldson, over 5,000 strikeouts, endless no hitters, and we go from there. And you can't get him in the Hall of Fame, right? But Dizzy Dean is in the Hall of Fame with 135 wins.
Hmm.
So, guys like me, we know these things. How we sit around looking at these numbers all our
Oh
lives,
man,
right?
you know,
So when I talk to somebody, we're in a different place because you've been reading. You think about it. I've been reading for 40 years, and
hmm
so I have lots of things in my head that some people are just finding out, and I've had time to develop the concept, rethink the idea, figure out what the pitfalls are, and be able to tell something that's convincing based on the information that's there. But after 40 years, you can do that. And some people are trying to do it after 5 years, and they've got a lot of mistakes and fallacies in their argument.
Yeah, it's context. It's important. It really, really is important. I see it. I see it all the time. Outside of here, just in the regular business world. I mean, you can make decisions based on information, and if it's out of context or not, telling the entire picture, you're making these decisions, and they may or may not have been the right ones. The one that cracks me up all the time, and I love saying this, is that when the leaders in certain categories,
Mhm.
such as lowest ERA in a season, people went bananas when it was Eugene Bremer. Flash Bremer was there for a while. Now he's not, but the uh, the fact that prior to the Negro League statistics being added into the Baseball Reference, it was a player, Tim Keefe, from like 1880, when they were pitching, from 50 feet and no mound, and the counts were changing, and sometimes you can catch it out of bounds, and all those statistics were okay. But don't put those black guy statistics in there. No, 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 we can't have that. I mean, it was a different game then, and everybody was okay with those stats. The Negro Leagues were major leagues. They were all along. put them in there and keep on working them. Keep giving the context. That's really the most important thing. So
That is true.
the rookie, his words, his voice, John Buck O'Neill is out. You're working on some more. I encourage people check out all of your books. They're all national treasures. With your latest book, that is a cool thing to be able to QR code and hear Buck's
Mhm.
voice. Yeah, I think people need to check it out. And you keep doing what you're doing, man. I'm sure you will. 3 books this year. Cool.
That's what we're going to try to do. I don't know if we'll make it, but like I said, it's 30 years since I released my first book, and that's quite an accomplishment. I'm really proud of that, and
Can
so like I say, if you pick up the Buck O'Neill book, you'll find a lot of rich history because
hmm
not only is it about the 38th season, but I interviewed the manager of the Atlanta Black Crackers, Gabby Kemp. I interviewed him. Double D. Ratcliffe. I interviewed him, and I was able to talk about people through interviews. I'll give you one thing, for instance. If you go to the stat for 1938 on Scene Head, right? You go there, and when you're looking down at the names, they have a guy. They said Bet Barnes was his name, and but his name wasn't Bet Barnes. His name was I.V. Barnes. I interviewed his wife, and so if you want to get the information correct, you better pick up my book and at some point access some of this information because
hmm
I correct a lot of information in things that I write. But yeah, and they don't have his name right, and but it's not that hard to find because it was in my first Buck O'Neill book, and it's in there again. So pick up the book and read it, and then keep writing your stuff. Right?
hmm No, it's an ongoing thing, and yeah, like you just pointed out, sometimes there's things that are um, hiding in plain sight. Just need to find them, right?
And I try to look at everyone's, read it, check it out at a library, own
hmm
it if I can. All the books that come out in the Negro Leagues.
hmm I applaud I applaud all the work that those guys have done as well as far as digging for these box scores and everything else. And they will continue to keep doing it and fine tuning it. But yeah, the stories are, I think, just as important when it comes to Negro League history. And I'm just glad you are out there telling them. So you keep doing
Yeah.
what you're doing, man, and
All right.
keep in touch. Can you? I mean, can you? I mean, or do you want to wait? Can you elaborate on what else you're working on this year?
Well, I've got another volume of my American Baseball Chronicles, the 1910 Leland Giants. That's pretty much finished, and then I've got a couple of boxing books.
Oh,
So I know quite a bit about boxing. I don't get a chance to talk about it much, but I will when I finish the book. But so those are a couple of things that I'm working on.
awesome.
And so
Uh,
they're almost finished. So yeah, this is just one of those. It's going to be a fun year, but every year is a fun year,
mhm,
and it's always great to be able to talk about baseball, write about baseball, and
mhm.
yeah, because I don't play anymore. I want to get a bat and go down to the batting cage, but I'll probably but did that for years. I coached for 30 years as well. A lot of people
Mhm.
don't know. I coached
Cool,
actually for 30
cool.
years. So anyway,
I'm sure you were telling a lot of stories while you were coaching as well, too, right?
well, the thing is, I learned a long time ago that you have to time your stories. And so I never talked about myself
hmm
unless it was a key important time.
hmm
But it was all about the kids and developing them and getting them to love the game. So we did things that made baseball fun.
hmm
And that was the most important thing because if a child loves baseball, they will come back and they will come back and they'll keep coming back. And,
Absolutely.
and that's what I believe and that's the way I try to live my life.
Awesome, man. Well, you like I said, I told you this last time. I could probably talk to you till the sun comes up tomorrow about baseball history. But I know you're a busy guy. I really appreciate you coming on here doing this again. We'll keep spreading the stories. You stay safe, be well in your travels, and we'll talk again sometime soon.
And then let them know they can get the Buck O'Neill book. You can order right from Amazon. So
Yeah, that's right. I meant to when I mentioned it earlier a few minutes ago, and then we start talking. So you can find it on Amazon. You can order it through your website as well.
right,
I like to get the Audible copies if I can. So those are always good because sometimes I'm out somewhere and I like to be able to also check it out on my phone. Besides but I still like having books. Books.
yeah,
I'm
I do
I'm
too.
an old school guy when it comes to books. So. But you take care.
I
Don't
like getting mine autographed, by the way, too. You can't autograph an ebook.
you can't, right?
I have a great autograph collection
I'm
of
sure you
books, but
do.
yeah, so yeah, I still like a book in my hand. I really do.
Hmm.
So. But thank you. It's
Thank
always
you
an
again.
honor and a pleasure to talk to
This
you.
was
And
fun. This
okay, I appreciate it, and hope to meet you someday when I get up in your territory.
absolutely. I would love that. That would be great. Don't. I'm gonna sign us off. Don't go away. Thanks,
Okay.
Phil. Bye bye.